Welcome back to Shadow Fear. I'm your host, and tonight things feel different. On my desk right now sit 7 stories, all sent to me from the same place. Tiny towns in Oregon where the population signs are more rusty than people. But here's what's been haunting me. Every single person who shared these stories with me is now missing. What you're about to hear comes from a mill worker who called in sick one day and vanished. A doctor who was meant to help children, but sent her last message months ago. A cop whose own department insists she never existed. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. Until they didn't. From the outside, these towns look calm. Populations of 200, maybe 500 if you're lucky. The kind of places where you wave at strangers and never lock your doors. But something lives here. Something that watches, waits, and collects. Before we begin, I need you to do one thing. Subscribe and hit that bell. After tonight, you'll understand why these stories had to be shared, and why the people who lived them might not be around to tell them. So turn off the lights, lock your doors, and let's discover what happens when small towns hide very big secrets. My name is Mike. I grew up in Mill Creek, Oregon, a tiny logging town tucked between dense forests and a river that never seemed to sleep. Most people don't even know where Mill Creek is unless they've driven the long, winding road off Highway 26. Past stretches of pine so thick it feels like they're swallowing the sky. I moved back here about a year ago after living in Portland for a few years to help my dad run his old repair shop. I thought coming home would be simple, quiet, familiar, but I quickly learned that some things about this town are better left alone. It all started last November. Fog had settled over Mill Creek like a heavy blanket, thick enough that the streetlights barely cut through it. My dad had warned me about that time of year. The fog that rolls in from the river isn't ordinary. People around here have stories, mostly whispered in the diner or at the hardware store. Fog people, they call them. Shadowy figures that move silently, appearing and disappearing like smoke. I'd laughed it off back then. Everyone in town has some weird story. But that first night, I started to understand why no one jokes about it. The fog rolled in like spilled ink, swallowing the bridge whole. And that's when old man Harris vanished, leaving only the echo of his boots behind. Harris was 82, stubborn, and had lived in Mill Creek his entire life. He liked to take walks at night, carrying a lantern, waving at anyone who passed by. That night, my dad saw him crossing the Mill Creek Bridge. He waved back, and then the fog swallowed him. No scream, no struggle, just silence. We didn't find him the next morning. No footprints, nothing. Just gone. At first, everyone thought it was an accident. The river is fast, the current's vicious, especially in November. But when Mrs. Cartwright's cat disappeared the same week, followed by a stray dog near the edge of the bridge, people started whispering again. Fog people, someone muttered at the diner, their coffee shaking in their hands. I told myself it was just superstition. Animals go missing all the time. Old men fall in rivers. That's reality, not ghost stories. Then my friend Jenna started acting strange. Jenna has lived here her whole life too, works at the library, and she's one of the few people I could trust with my late-night walks to the shop. She called me one evening, her voice shaking. "Mike, I saw something by the bridge," she whispered. I laughed nervously. "It's foggy, Jenna. Maybe a deer?" She paused. It wasn't a deer. It was moving, and it didn't make a sound. Not one. And then it just disappeared. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to brush it off, but her face over the video call, pale, eyes wide, made it hard to do that. Hard. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing the fog rolling in, hiding shapes that weren't supposed to exist. A few nights later, my dad called me around 11 p.m. He was usually calm, a man who had seen logging accidents, car crashes, and small-town drama his whole life. But his voice was tight, panicked. "Mike, you need to come to the bridge." I asked why, and he just said, "I don't know. Just come." When I got there, the fog was thick, thicker than anything I'd ever seen. It pressed against your skin, made it hard to breathe, and there was a quiet so heavy it felt wrong. No crickets, no wind, just that silence. My dad was standing by the railing, peering into the gray nothing. "Look," he said, pointing. I squinted. There was nothing. I saw someone, he said, voice trembling. I swear, a man, just standing there looking at me. And then he turned, walked into the fog. I couldn't see him, couldn't hear him, and then he was gone. I know it sounds crazy, Mike, but it's happening. People are vanishing. I didn't want to believe him. I'm a rational person. But over the next 2 weeks, the disappearances continued. First Harris, then a local delivery guy named Tommy, then 2 teenagers who had been walking home from the diner. No signs of struggle, no bodies, nothing. Just gone. And every time, witnesses said the same thing. A fog and a figure that didn't move like a person. I started keeping a notebook, recording everything I could. Dates, times, descriptions. And then I noticed a pattern. All disappearances happened within a half-mile of the old Mill Creek Bridge, always on foggy nights. And there was something else. Everyone who saw it described it differently, but the feeling was the same. The figure was wrong. Too tall, too thin, like it was stretched, and its movements weren't natural. One night I decided to see for myself. I took my flashlight and walked to the bridge, camera in hand. Jenna insisted on coming with me, and we told ourselves it was just curiosity, just research. The fog had rolled in again, heavy and wet, clinging to our clothes. I shivered, even though I was wearing a jacket. We didn't speak much, just walked, listening to our own footsteps. Then we saw it. At first, I thought it was a man, standing at the edge of the bridge, staring at the water. But then I realized it wasn't. Its head was too large, its arms hung too low, and its legs moved in ways that shouldn't have been possible. We froze. Jenna whispered, "Mike, that's it." It turned toward us. Not fast, but smooth, like liquid. No eyes, or if it had them, they were hidden in the shadows of its face. No mouth, just a blank darkness. And then it started walking toward us, silent, gliding more than walking. I remember thinking, this can't be happening. This isn't real. And yet it was. We ran. I don't know how far. Fog swallowed everything around us. When we finally stopped, we were at the edge of town, hearts hammering, gasping for breath. Jenna looked at me, pale, tears in her eyes. We have to leave. We can't stay here. The next morning we tried to convince ourselves it was our imagination. But then the news came. 2 more people had vanished last night, right near the bridge, and witnesses? They said the same thing. A figure in the fog, silent, impossible, and gone. I don't know what it is. Some nights I can hear it outside my window when the fog rolls in. Just a shape moving silently, too fast to see clearly, too quiet to hear. I've tried recording it, but the camera picks up nothing, just the fog. But I feel it. People in town are scared. Some refuse to go out after dark. Others say we should call it a natural phenomenon, a mental illness, or just bad luck. But I know better. I've seen it. And the scariest part? I think it's waiting for the next foggy night, waiting for the next person to walk onto the bridge and vanish. I don't know what will happen to Mill Creek. I don't know if anyone ever comes back once they're gone. I just know this. If you ever find yourself in a small town with fog that rolls in like spilled ink and you see a figure moving silently in it, don't follow it. Don't approach it. And whatever you do, don't go near the bridge. Because some things I've learned aren't meant to be seen. And some things, once they notice you, they don't let go. Even now, I hear it sometimes. Not in my dreams, not on the river. It's closer, outside, watching, waiting, and the fog never forgets. My name is Linda. I retired from nursing about 6 months ago after 30 years of long shifts and endless nights in the hospital. I thought I'd spend my golden years quietly, maybe gardening, reading, and visiting my sister in Pendleton, Oregon. But retirement doesn't pay bills, and when the opportunity came to work at the Whispering Pines Motel, I took it. I told myself it would be simple. A quiet, low-stress job, mostly checking people in, answering the phone, and making sure the rooms were clean. The motel sat alone, miles outside of town, nestled against a slope of pine trees with nothing but the highway and foggy fields for company. From the first day, I knew something was off. Not immediately, not in a way you could point at. The building looked normal enough, paint peeling on the trim, the neon sign buzzing faintly. But the air felt heavy, like it carried whispers from long ago. I laughed it off at first, thinking maybe it was just the old structure settling or my imagination. But it started with the guests. Room 3 had a man who arrived late one night, his car headlights cutting through the mist. He didn't speak English, or at least not in a way I recognized. He mumbled under his breath, words that sounded harsh and sharp, almost like he was speaking in an old, forgotten dialect. I checked the room later, and his window was open, curtains fluttering in the wind. I swear I could hear the words again, faint like they were drifting through the walls. Then there was room 7. The walls of room 7 weren't old. They were listening. That was the first thing I noticed. You could feel it like a pulse behind the wallpaper. I didn't think much of it until the night I heard crying. Not the usual kind, soft sobs that people make when they're sad, but a low, urgent sound, almost pleading. I checked the guest ledger. Room 7 had been empty for days. I started keeping notes in my journal. Strange occurrences. Lights flickering in rooms with no one in them. The faint smell of smoke when there hadn't been a fire. The feeling that someone was standing behind me even when I was alone. The guests were odd, too. A family of 3 arrived, speaking in perfect English, but their eyes, I don't know how to describe it. Dark, like someone had erased the color, replaced it with shadow. They didn't smile, didn't interact beyond the minimum. They just moved through the motel, whispering to each other in words that didn't make sense. One night I stayed late to finish paperwork. It was about 11 p.m., and the fog had rolled in thick, swallowing the edges of the highway and the distant pine trees. I could hear footsteps on the old wooden floors above me, though I knew the motel was empty. I went upstairs, expecting maybe a guest who had returned for some forgotten item. The hallway was empty. The carpet was damp with mist from the fog seeping through the cracked windows. And then I heard it, a voice, soft, almost inaudible, coming from room 7. I froze. My heart raced. I whispered, "Hello?" There was no answer, just the voice repeating a single word over and over, faster each time. I can't remember what the word was. That's the problem. It slipped through my memory like smoke. I knocked on the door. "Hello? Is someone there?" Nothing. And yet, I felt it, something behind the door. Waiting, watching. The next day I asked the owner about room 7. He was a small, hunched man named Mr. Callahan. He shook his head when I mentioned the crying. "Don't worry about that room," he said, voice low. "Some rooms, they remember." I laughed nervously, but he didn't. His eyes were sharp, cold, like he had seen too much and learned not to talk about it. After that, things escalated. Guests would leave abruptly, sometimes in the middle of the night, claiming they had to leave for emergencies. Sometimes they didn't leave at all, they just vanished. No calls, no word to their families, nothing. Housekeeping would find their rooms in perfect order, beds made, everything untouched. But I swear the faint smell of smoke would linger, or a whisper would drift through the air vents. I started to notice patterns. It was always the same. Guests would stay 2-3 nights, behave normally, then something in the middle of the night would change. They'd wake me up asking questions in languages I couldn't understand, eyes wide, pointing at nothing. One man, a guest in room 5, asked me for a glass of water, but when I handed it to him, he stared at it like it was a living thing, his mouth opening to speak, but the words weren't English. I backed away. He smiled then, unnaturally, and whispered, "It's here." By the 3rd week, I started hearing the whispers outside of guest interactions. Hallways would hum with conversations that made no sense. Doors would open and close on their own. And sometimes I could swear I saw shadows moving behind the curtains, shapes that didn't match the furniture or the layout of the room. I wasn't the only one noticing. Jenna, a local waitress I'd befriended, came by one night to visit. She stopped at the end of the hall, eyes wide. "Linda, do you hear that?" I nodded. A faint murmuring, almost like a dozen people talking at once, but impossible to decipher. The worst part was room 7. I started avoiding it, but something compelled me to check it constantly. One night around 2 a.m. I heard a soft knock at the door. I told myself it was probably a rat, or the old plumbing settling. But the knocking continued, slow, deliberate. I whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. I opened the door, flashlight in hand. The room was empty, nothing but a single chair in the center facing the corner. And then I saw it, the chair, rocking slightly. Not enough to fall over, just moving as if someone invisible were sitting in it, breathing, waiting. I backed out, heart hammering. That's when I realized something terrifying. Room 7 wasn't just haunted. I was aware. It reacted to me. It knew I was there. The whispers grew louder that night. Voices overlapping, speaking in languages I couldn't identify. I covered my ears, shaking, backing down the hall. When I looked back, the chair was still rocking, slowly, deliberately. The next morning, I found a guest who had checked in. Room 7. I hadn't heard the car arrive, hadn't seen anyone. But the room had a new occupant. I knocked on the door. A man answered, smiling eyes. Wrong, dark as night like the others. He said, "I've been waiting." I stumbled back, unsure how he knew I was speaking. He stepped aside, letting me see inside. The room was empty except for the chair, and yet I felt it watching me from every corner. I don't remember much after that night. I quit the motel the next morning. Mr. Callahan didn't ask why. He just nodded as if he already knew what had happened. I packed my things and left, never looking back. But I couldn't escape the feeling that I'd brought something with me. At home in my quiet apartment, I sometimes hear soft murmurs just out of reach. A voice speaking in a language I don't know, repeating a single word. It makes my skin crawl, even when I tell myself it's my imagination. Sometimes I dream about the chair in room 7. I see it rocking, just slightly, waiting for me to return. I wake up sweating, heart racing, only to hear faint knocking at my bedroom door. No one is there, but I know it's there. I feel it, and I know deep down that the Whispering Pines Motel isn't done with me. It never will be. If you ever find yourself in a small town driving late at night and you see a neon motel sign glowing through the fog, don't stop. Don't ask for a room, and whatever you do, don't knock on room 7, because some places remember. Some places are alive, and room 7, it's waiting. My name is Daniel. I've lived in Yamhill, Oregon my entire life. Most people know our town for the vineyards. Rows of grapes stretching over rolling hills, sunlight glinting off the leaves in the summer. Every year, the grape harvest is the highlight of the season. Families gather, tourists wander through tasting rooms, and the air is thick with the smell of crushed grapes and fresh earth. It's supposed to be idyllic. But last year, something happened during the harvest that I can't explain, and I'm not the only one. Every year, the grapes grow sweeter. Every year, the shadows in the vineyard grow hungrier. It started in late September when the harvest came earlier than usual. The grapes were enormous, bursting with color, deep purples and reds that glistened like jewels in the sun. Everyone in town was excited. Farmers bragged about the yield. The wineries promised record-breaking sales. But as the harvest began, people started to see things. At first, it was subtle. Old Mrs. Claremont swore that the vines in her backyard had moved while she slept, curling like fingers toward her windows. My neighbor Paul said he saw faces in the grape leaves, staring at him while he worked the fields. I laughed when he told me. Paul has a vivid imagination, but then the hallucinations got worse. It happened to me first one evening when I stayed late in the vineyard, helping my father sort through crates. The sun had just dipped below the horizon and the rows of grapes were already dark, heavy with dew. I was stacking crates when I noticed movement at the edge of my vision. A vine shifted. Not from wind. Not from animals. It twisted, writhing like it was alive. I rubbed my eyes. Maybe it was tiredness. Maybe the sugar from the crushed grapes had gone to my head. But when I looked again, the vine had formed a shape almost like a hand reaching toward me. I froze. My father was a few rows away, unaware. I blinked and the hand was gone, the vine still, as if it had never moved. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. Tired, that's all. But the unease lingered. Over the next week, more people reported similar things. Hallucinations, shadows in the rows of grapes, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, carried on the wind but spoken in words that made no sense. Some of the older farmers dismissed it as exhaustion or stress, but younger people like me began to feel it differently. The vines. They were watching. And sometimes the watching came with consequences. It was Mike and Sarah, a couple who worked part-time at the local winery, who first vanished. They were out in the fields late, making sure the harvest bins were full. When the morning came, the workers found their crates untouched. No footprints, no tracks, nothing. Just empty fields and a faint smell of crushed grapes lingering in the air. Rumors spread quickly. Something in the vineyard had taken them. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself it was an accident, that maybe they had gotten lost or fallen. But that night, as I walked home through the rows, I saw the faces again. Faces in the leaves, twisting, grinning, watching me. I ran the last few blocks, heart pounding. But the images followed me into my dreams, and I knew. The vineyard was different this year. After Mike and Sarah disappeared, the town grew tense. Harvest work continued, but the mood was somber. Families whispered at the diner, sharing strange experiences. Lights that moved through the vineyard at night, vines curling toward windows, shadows that weren't human. Some swore the grapes themselves had a strange glimmer, like they were wet with something else, something alive. I started keeping a notebook, writing down everything I saw, vines twisting in impossible ways, shapes that formed and disappeared, whispers that seemed to call my name. And one night I saw it clearly. I was walking alone, checking the last rows of grapes near the forest edge. Moonlight barely cut through the fog rolling in from the hills. I felt wrong. The air was heavy, thick. And then I saw movement. The vines twisted up from the ground, curling around each other, forming a tall, human-like figure. Its head swayed, leaves trembling. The whispers were louder now, overlapping voices, words I didn't understand but felt in my bones. My knees went weak. I tried to back away. It reached toward me. I ran. Branches scraped my arms and face. When I reached the edge of the vineyard, I looked back. The figure had vanished, but the whispers stayed, faint, carried on the wind. I didn't sleep that night, staring out my window, waiting. The next day, more people disappeared. 2 teenagers exploring the vineyards for fun didn't return. My father refused to go near the fields anymore. "Stay inside," he said. "The harvest is cursed this year. Stay away from it." I wanted to argue, but the unease in the town was real, tangible. Everyone was watching the hills, the rows of grapes, afraid of what might emerge from them. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Something was in the vineyard, something that had been awakened by the unusually bountiful harvest. I started walking the fields at night, trying to see it again. The shapes, the whispers. I had to understand. It happened a week later. I stayed until midnight when the fog rolled in thick. The vineyard looked ordinary in the dim light, but I knew better. I felt it before I saw it. The subtle movement of the vines, the faint pressure in the air like eyes were on me. And then I saw it. A vine wrapped around a crate, moving slowly, deliberately. Then another, forming a shape, human but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with arms that extended unnaturally. Leaves covered the head, but I felt its gaze. And I swear it spoke. Not words, not in English, but I understood it. It wanted me. I ran. I didn't look back. When I reached my house, I locked the doors and windows, but I knew it could find its way in if it wanted. The whispers followed me inside, soft at first, then growing louder in the silence of my bedroom. I slept with the lights on, sitting in a chair, waiting. The next morning, the town was quiet. No one talked about what happened. People avoided the vineyard entirely. But I knew. I saw the shapes. I heard the whispers. And I knew they weren't done. The harvest ended, but the vines remained. They grew back every year, stronger, hungrier, and every year the whispers start again. People in Yam Hill avoid the fields once the grapes start ripening, but sometimes someone goes too close, and they vanish. I don't go near the vineyards anymore. I drive past them quickly, windows up, music loud. But even now, when the wind blows just right, I hear it. The rustle of leaves, like someone or something is moving just behind the vines, watching, waiting. And I know. One day it might call my name again. My name is Jason. I grew up outside Tillamook, Oregon, on a dairy farm my family has owned for 3 generations. Most of the time, life here is quiet. The cows graze, the fog rolls in from the coast, and the town keeps to itself. But for the past few years, something has been happening that I can't explain. Something that no one in Tillamook really talks about outside of hushed whispers. The lights weren't fireflies, and they weren't stars. They were hungry. It started about 3 years ago. Late at night, farmers began seeing strange orange lights hovering over the fields. At first, everyone assumed they were some new kind of drone or weird reflection from headlights on the highway. But soon we noticed the cows. They'd vanish, sometimes just one, sometimes a whole herd, and then reappear days later scattered across the pastures. And when they came back, they were different. Wounds that didn't make sense. Cuts and marks that no tool or animal could make. Their eyes seemed wrong, empty. I didn't believe it at first. But one night I couldn't sleep and curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside. The fog was thick, the kind that drapes itself over the fields and muffles every sound. And then I saw them, the lights. Small at first, flickering over the horizon. Orange and pulsing like embers. They moved slowly, hovering over the pastures, circling the cows like predators. My heart started racing. I wasn't the only one watching. Old Man Harris, he's lived here almost 80 years, was leaning on the fence staring up at the lights. "Don't go near 'em," he said. "They're not what you think. They'll take more than your cattle if you're careless." I laughed nervously. "What do you mean more than the cows?" He didn't answer. Just shook his head, muttering something about things grazing in the fog. A few weeks later, more cows disappeared. I went with my dad to check the fences in the fields. The ground was strange in places, scorched like something hot had pressed against it, yet there was no burn or fire. The grass was flattened in strange circular patterns. I told myself it was probably some strange local animal, but deep down I knew better. One night, my neighbor Tom dared me to follow the lights. He was younger, reckless, and loved proving he wasn't afraid. I said no, of course, but that night I couldn't stop thinking about it. Finally, I grabbed my coat and flashlight and I went out alone. The fog had rolled in heavier than usual, curling around the farmhouses and the pasture fences. I followed the lights, keeping my distance. They hovered over the field, moving like they were searching, scanning. And then, I saw something grazing among the cows. I froze. It wasn't human. Not exactly. It was tall, hunched and thin, with limbs that bent wrong. Its face was obscured, shadowed, but I could see movement, slow, deliberate, and hungry. The cows, they weren't moving normally either. Some were lying on the ground, motionless, yet the creature grazed among them, almost like it was feeding. My flashlight slipped from my hands, clattering against the fence. The creature turned sharply toward me. I ran. The fog swallowed me immediately. My boots sank into wet grass as the lights hovered closer, pulsing brighter. I tripped and fell, scrambling to get up. I could hear something behind me moving quickly, the soft crunch of hooves or feet? I don't know. All I know is I ran until I reached the farmhouse, slammed the door, and locked it. That night I didn't sleep. I heard whispers, or maybe it was the wind through the broken window panes. Either way, I knew what I'd seen. It wasn't human. By the next morning, another cow had vanished, and the marks on the ones left behind were worse than before. Scars, cuts, strange burn-like shapes, and eyes that seemed empty. My father refused to talk about it, but I could see the worry etched into his face. And I knew, if those lights came again, it wasn't just the cows at risk. I couldn't stop thinking about that night. The image of the creature grazing among the cows haunted me. I started taking shifts in the field at night, trying to see it again, trying to understand. Most nights the fog was too thick, the lights too distant. But one night I was lucky, or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. The fog rolled in thick as soup, and I could barely see a few feet ahead. Then through the haze I saw the orange glow, low over the pasture, moving slowly. My stomach twisted. I moved closer, careful to stay hidden behind a barn. And then I saw them. The lights weren't alone. There were multiple creatures, hunched figures grazing among the cows, their limbs bending in ways no living thing should. One of them turned its head, and for a brief second I thought I saw my own face reflected in its eyes. Hollow, black, staring back at me. My heart pounded, my breath coming in sharp gasps. And then it spoke. Not words, not language I knew, just a low vibration that made my chest hurt. I stumbled backward, tripping over the fence posts, and the lights seemed to chase me, hovering closer. I ran to the farmhouse again, slammed the door, and told my dad. He didn't argue, didn't ask questions. He just nodded, muttering, "I told you. You shouldn't have seen it." I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but there were none. Just the fog rolling over the fields and the occasional flicker of orange light through the mist. The disappearances continued. Animals vanished, strange markings appeared on the ground, and the townsfolk started talking quietly among themselves. But no one dared go out at night anymore. Farmers stopped checking the fences. Children were kept inside after dark. And the lights, they never stopped. Always hovering, always searching. I've stayed up most nights since, watching, waiting. Sometimes I see them from the road, lights pulsing in the fog, grazing shapes moving among the pastures. I don't know what they want or why the cows or why us, but I know that once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. That hunger follows you even when the lights are gone. The strangest part? It's like they know who's watching. Some nights I swear the lights come closer if I linger too long. The shadows stretch unnaturally, limbs bending, bodies moving in ways that defy everything I understand. And the cows. The cows sometimes come back days later, but they're never the same. Empty eyes, scars, and a subtle, unnatural stillness that makes you hesitate before approaching. I haven't slept well since. Sometimes I hear rustling in the fields when the fog is thick, whispers or low growls I can't identify. My dad refuses to go out at night. Even the other farmers keep to their homes. We all know what's out there, but no one speaks about it in detail. Talking too much seems dangerous, like admitting the truth might make it come for you sooner. I don't know how long this will last. The lights are back again tonight, glowing faintly over the fields. I sit in my room, flashlight in hand, just waiting, listening, hoping they don't notice me. But I can't shake the feeling that they already do. That creature, grazing in the fog with eyes like hollows, knows where I am. And I know if it decides it wants more than the cows, I won't be able to run. Tillamook is quiet tonight. Too quiet. The fog presses against the windows, orange light flickering at the edges. I'm writing this down because I can't keep it inside. Someone needs to know what's out there. Someone needs to understand. If you're ever driving through Tillamook late at night and you see orange lights hovering over the pastures, don't stop. Don't watch. And whatever you do, don't follow them. Because once they notice you, once they know you're watching, you might not come back, and the cows, they're just the beginning. My name is Thomas. I moved to Ashland, Oregon about a year ago, looking for a quiet life after a messy divorce and a string of bad apartments. I found a small house in a sleepy neighborhood, the kind where everyone waves when you pull into your driveway. At first it was perfect, quiet streets, neighbors who kept to themselves, and a sense that life could finally slow down. That is, until I started hearing noises. He was always behind the wallpaper, smiling at the wrong moments. At first I thought it was just the house settling. Old houses creak, groan, and make noises that sound like footsteps or whispers. But it wasn't like that. The shuffling came at night, always after midnight, always from the walls of the living room. I'd wake up to the sound of something moving just behind the plaster, slow, deliberate, like someone was pacing. I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was mice. Maybe it was just my imagination. But the sound didn't stop. One evening I mentioned it to my neighbor Carla, who had lived here for over 20 years. She laughed at first. "Old houses," she said. "Nothing more. You're fine." But when she stayed over one night, she didn't laugh the next morning. She looked pale, wringing her hands. "Thomas, that sound," she whispered. "It isn't the house. It's someone. I've heard it before, years ago. Don't ask me how I know, just be careful." I decided to call a handyman, a local guy named Rick, to check the walls for structural issues or pests. Rick was a burly man, quiet but reliable, the kind who knows more about old houses than the city inspectors. When he arrived, I explained the noises. He nodded, scratched his beard, and said, "I've seen some weird stuff in old walls, but nothing like what you're describing. Let's take a look." We started in the living room, removing the baseboards and loosening sections of wallpaper. Nothing at first. Just plaster, insulation, and dust. But then Rick paused, crouched, and tapped the wall. "Hear that?" he said. I did. A faint shuffle, almost like breathing, coming from inside the wall. My stomach turned. Rick frowned. "This isn't right." He pried a section of the wall open further, and that's when we saw it. An outline, a shadow, pressed against the inside. Not a shadow of something outside, but of something inside the wall. The figure was small, hunched, and motionless. I froze. The next night I stayed awake, listening. The shuffling started again, slower this time, deliberate, almost teasing. And then a whisper, so soft I could barely catch it. "Thomas." It said my name. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just someone hiding, it was aware I knew. It knew I was listening. I called Rick back. "You have to see this," I said, voice shaking. He arrived quickly, flashlight in hand. We cut a larger section of the wall near the living room, and that's when we found him. A man, thin and pale, crouched inside the wall cavity, eyes wide, staring. His clothes were tattered, filthy, and he had a strange, knowing smile on his face. He didn't resist. He didn't speak at first. He just watched us, breathing shallowly, like he had been waiting for someone to find him. Rick backed away slowly. I stood frozen, unsure if I should call the police or run. The man finally spoke in a low, calm voice. "I've been here a long time." He told us his name was Samuel. Not much else except that he had lived in the walls of houses in this neighborhood for years, surviving on scraps, hiding from everyone, and watching. He whispered things, secrets about the town that no one was supposed to know. Things about families, disputes, crimes buried and forgotten. And he knew people's routines, what they were thinking, what they had hidden. I couldn't believe it at first. How could someone survive in a wall for years without anyone noticing? He explained it with chilling calmness. He had learned to move silently, eat quietly, and stay unseen. Sometimes neighbors would hear shuffling, whispering, scratching, but they would dismiss it, thinking it was the house or their imagination. But he had been there, always observing, always waiting. He showed us corners of the wall cavity where he had fashioned small sleeping areas, hidden food caches, and even crude tools. Nothing fancy, just enough to survive. But there was something else. Something that made my stomach turn. "People change when they think no one is watching," he said. "I've seen it all. The fights behind closed doors. The lies, the betrayals. I know what they hide." Over the next few days, I couldn't shake him from my mind. I thought about what he had said, and about how close he had been, silently observing the house I thought was mine. Every time I went into the living room, I felt his eyes on me, even though he was gone. Rick had helped me seal the wall again, but the sense of being watched never left. Then things started happening that couldn't be ignored. Small objects moved on their own. The floorboards creaked in the middle of the night. I heard soft whispers repeating my name, fragments of sentences I couldn't fully catch. I tried to tell myself it was paranoia, but I knew better. Samuel wasn't just in the wall anymore. He had left a presence, something that lingered, feeding on the fear and secrets of the house. I spoke to neighbors, cautiously, without revealing too much. Others had stories too. Houses with unexplained noises, missing items, glimpses of shadows behind wallpaper or in closets. Samuel wasn't unique to my home. He had moved quietly through the neighborhood for years, always unnoticed, always observing. And no one wanted to talk about it, afraid of what acknowledging it might do. One night I decided to confront the feeling directly. I sat in the living room, flashlight under my chin, waiting. The shuffling started again, slow, deliberate, like someone pacing inside the walls. Then the whispering. I could hear my name, but also others. Voices I didn't recognize, conversations from neighbors, secrets not meant to be known. The sound seemed to come from all directions surrounding me. I realized then that Samuel's presence wasn't just physical. It was psychological. The man had hidden himself in the walls for decades, and somehow that hiding had extended beyond his body. The house itself seemed alive with him, watching, remembering, whispering. I left the house for a few days, staying at a friend's place. When I returned, I tried to act normal, but I could feel it, the same way you feel someone's eyes on the back of your neck. The house was quiet, but not empty. I don't know where Samuel went or if he's still around, but I've learned to live with it. I lock my doors, but I never lock my mind because I know he or something he left behind has access. I don't tell anyone this story. Most people wouldn't believe it. And some things are better left unsaid. But if you ever hear shuffling behind your walls at night or whispers calling your name, don't assume it's the house settling. Listen closely, because he might be there, watching, waiting, and he knows more than you ever will. My name is Eli. I've lived in Astoria, Oregon all my life. I grew up on the waterfront, watching the fishing boats come and go, smelling the salt air, listening to gulls fight over scraps. Normally, life here is simple. Fog rolling in from the river is nothing unusual. But this wasn't normal. Fog isn't supposed to move like this. It isn't supposed to whisper your name. It began last spring, just after the winter storms. Fishermen started reporting something strange on the river. They'd leave the docks in the morning, and within minutes a thick fog would roll in, thicker than anything they'd ever seen. And it didn't just hover, it moved, swirling, curling like it had a mind of its own. Boats that had left the harbor would suddenly lose their bearings. engines stalling, compasses spinning. And sometimes people would vanish. I first noticed it one evening while walking home along the waterfront. The air was calm, the tide low. A fog rolled in from the river, slow at first, then faster, almost rushing toward the town like a living thing. I felt it against my skin, wet and cold, pressing in on me. And then I heard it, my name, whispered so softly I almost thought I was imagining it. Eli, I froze. The streets were empty, but the fog felt alive, curling around lampposts, licking at the windows of the houses along the river. I ran the last few blocks to my apartment, doors locked behind me, heart hammering. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, that it was my imagination. But when I looked out the window, the fog was still there, moving unnaturally, stretching across the town like a tide of smoke. The next day, reports came in. A local fisherman, Henry, didn't return from his trip. His boat was found drifting near the old cannery, engine dead, no sign of struggle. The fog had come in so fast, people said, he never had a chance. Others, who had been near the waterfront, reported seeing a massive shape in the mist, a shadow that moved against the current, something too large and unnatural to be a boat or whale. By the evening, panic had started to spread. I went to see the local historian, a man named Marcus, who has lived here all his life and knows the town's secrets better than anyone. He listened as I described the fog and what I had seen. He didn't laugh. He only frowned, eyes narrowing. Fog like this, he said slowly, has been mentioned in our town's records. Rare, yes, but dangerous. And it always follows the river. He paused. Some believe it's tied to old events. Things we tried to forget, things the river keeps hidden. That night I couldn't sleep. The fog rolled in again, thick and fast. It pressed against the windows, muting the streetlights outside, swallowing the familiar shapes of the buildings. And then, the whispering started again, my name. At first just a soft murmur, but then louder, insistent, urgent. Eli, Eli. I tried to stay calm, but I knew something was out there. Something massive, ancient, hungry. And if the stories were true, the people it took rarely came back the same, if at all. The following days were a blur. Boats vanished. A couple of teenagers fishing near the docks disappeared into the fog, and their cries were carried through the mist in ways that made your blood run cold. I tried to stay indoors, but the fog seemed to reach everywhere. Even walking down side streets, it would curl around corners, following, pressing, whispering. I returned to Marcus for answers. He showed me old town records, reports of a fog similar to this one stretching back over 100 years. People had disappeared, and there were sketches in the margins, massive, undefined shapes in the mist. It's like the river itself grows hungry, Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly. Something lives in it or beneath it. Something we can't fight, only survive. One night I couldn't resist. I needed to see it for myself. I borrowed a small boat from a neighbor and set out onto the river, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The fog rolled in faster than I expected, dense and wet, clinging to everything. I could barely see the bow of the boat in front of me. Then I felt it, a pressure in the air, something watching, massive and patient, and then I saw it. A shape emerged from the fog, bigger than anything I've ever seen on the river. It was dark, undefined, moving fluidly through the mist. Tentacles, limbs. I couldn't tell. But it was alive. The water around it churned as if the river itself obeyed it. My name echoed again, carried on the fog. Eli, come closer. My heart froze. I knew better. I didn't move. I turned the boat around, trying to escape. The fog thickened, pressing against me, disorienting me. I couldn't tell them apart. The river seemed endless, and I could hear something moving beneath the water, massive and deliberate. For a moment I thought I saw the shape's eyes glimmer through the mist, fixated on me. I made it back to shore by some miracle, drenched and shaking. The fog lingered at the edges of town, whispering, rustling, waiting. Over the next week, more disappearances were reported, and no one wanted to go near the river after dark. Marcus warned me that this fog comes and goes, but when it returns, it's always hungrier, always smarter. I don't know why it follows us, or why it seems to know our names. I only know that it does. And the thing in the mist, it's patient, ancient. It waits in the fog, unseen, and it remembers. Now, whenever the fog rolls in from the river, I lock my doors, draw the blinds, and try not to breathe too loudly. And sometimes, in the still moments before sleep, I hear it, whispering my name. I've learned that in Astoria, the fog isn't just water and air. It's something alive, something that hungers. And it doesn't forget. So if you ever find yourself near the river at night and a fog rolls in suddenly thick and unnatural, don't try to fight it. Don't call for help. And whatever you do, don't respond when it whispers your name, because it might be listening. My name is Clara. I moved to Cottage Grove, Oregon 6 months ago, hoping to escape the chaos of city life and maybe write a few feature stories for local papers. The town is picturesque in the day, quaint streets, mossy bridges, and that small town charm people talk about. But at night, it carries a weight I can't explain. The bell rang for no one, and yet, everyone listened. I first heard it while walking home from the diner late one night. It was faint, almost hesitant, a low tolling sound drifting through the streets. I stopped, trying to figure out where it was coming from. But the old church at the edge of town was abandoned. The steeple had long since lost its bell and the windows were boarded up. There was no one inside. And yet the bell tolled, slow and mournful, echoing across the town. The next morning I asked a few locals about it. Some laughed, calling it my imagination. Others were quieter, glancing away. An old man named Henry muttered, "The bell? It's always been there. Not the sound of a bell exactly, but it calls to them." I pressed him for answers, but he just shook his head, muttering something about the woods and the people lost to the bell. It wasn't until the third night that I saw the first victim. I had taken a shortcut through the woods behind the church when I saw a figure wandering aimlessly. A young woman, maybe 20 or so, walking without purpose, arms loose at her sides, eyes empty. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. Not a word. Her lips barely moved, her gaze fixed on nothing. I ran after her, but she disappeared into the fog as if swallowed by the forest itself. I asked around town. Others had seen the same thing. People wandering the woods, mute, vacant-eyed, always appearing after the bell tolled. No one knew why it happened, or where they went after the townsfolk found them. Curiosity overtook caution. I decided to investigate the church. During the day, I scouted the abandoned building. Boards nailed over doors and windows made it impossible to enter normally, but I noticed one panel loose on the side. I pried it open just enough to slip through. The inside smelled of rotten dust, stale air trapped for decades. Sunlight fell through cracks in the roof, illuminating pews warped by time. No bell, nothing that could make the tolling sound I'd heard. Then I found the journal, tucked beneath a loose floorboard, bound in cracked leather, yellowed with age. Its pages were filled with spidery handwriting detailing a ritual. The townsfolk of Cottage Grove decades ago had performed a ceremony to bind the town together, to protect it from misfortune. The ritual involved the church, a bell that never existed, and sacrifices to ensure the town's safety. The author's final entry was abrupt, ending with, "The bell will toll until the debt is repaid." My blood ran cold. The bell wasn't a bell. It was the ritual. It had never stopped. And the people wandering the woods were part of it. That night I stayed awake, watching the church from my window. The fog rolled in, thick and suffocating, wrapping the streets in a ghostly shroud. Around midnight I heard it. The tolling, slow, deliberate, haunting. And as the sound reached me, I felt the pull. My stomach dropped, my vision blurred, and I felt a strange compulsion to move toward the church. I fought it, heart racing, but I could see shadows moving among the trees, people. They walked silently, eyes vacant, following the sound. I grabbed my camera, notebook, anything to document this. I ran into the fog, moving toward the figures. Their faces were empty, pale, but I could see the outlines of townsfolk I recognized from the streets. They were mute, but their bodies radiated something unnatural, like the bell had hollowed them out, leaving only vessels of obedience. I followed them into the woods, every step echoing against the hush of the trees. The closer I got to the church, the louder the tolling became, not from the building but from the air itself, as if the forest had absorbed it and returned it louder, more insistent. Then I noticed the shapes around the church, symbols carved into trees, the ground trampled into strange patterns, remnants of something old and dark. The journal had been right. The debt had never been repaid. I crouched behind a moss-covered wall, watching the townsfolk circle the church in silence. And then I saw him, or them, figures dressed in dark robes, faces hidden, moving deliberately, chanting low, a rhythm that matched the bell tolls. They carried no bell, yet the sound rang out, omnipresent, unnatural. Every so often, One of the wandering townsfolk would step forward and kneel. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. The bell, the ritual, it demanded obedience. I realized then that the tolling wasn't just a sound. It was a command, a lure, and if the debt was not repaid, it would take more. People, memories, even souls binding them into the town forever. I backed away, trying not to make a sound, but my foot snapped a twig. One of the wandering figures turned slowly, eyes empty but somehow aware. The fog thickened, swirling around me, pushing me toward the church. I ran blindly, branches scraping my arms, the bell tolling louder, insistent, omnipresent. When I reached the edge of the woods, the fog parted and I collapsed, gasping, the sound of the bell fading but never leaving my ears. I haven't returned to the church since. I don't know if the ritual continues every night or only when the fog is thick. But I do know this. Cottage Grove is not the quaint, sleepy town it appears to be. Beneath its streets and mossy bridges lies a debt, a promise made decades ago echoing through the lives of anyone who hears the bell. I write this as a warning. If you ever hear the tolling, if you feel the fog press against your windows, don't follow it. Don't answer its call, because the bell isn't for you, it's for the town, for the debt, and it won't stop until it claims what it's owed. And if you hear your name whispered on the wind, don't respond, because the bell is always listening.